A24 buried a Netflix deal that would have changed independent film forever, and the reason they killed it is something both companies have spent years making sure you never connected. The numbers were real. The meetings happened. The trade press reported the surface details and moved on. But nobody told you what clause ended it, who made the call, or what it cost every independent filmmaker who came after. By 2018, A24 was no longer a scrappy distributor quietly releasing Moonlight and The Witch to half-empty theaters and waiting for awards season to vindicate them. They had become the most talked-about production company in Hollywood, a studio that had cracked the code on making critically essential films on budgets that wouldn't cover catering on a Marvel set. Moonlight had won Best Picture in 2017. Lady Bird, The Florida Project, Hereditary, all within the same 18-month window. Meanwhile, Netflix had just passed 130 million subscribers globally and was burning through $8 billion a year in content spend. They needed prestige. They needed cultural credibility. They needed exactly what A24 had spent 6 years building from nothing. The conversation started in early 2018. Multiple meetings, senior creative executives on both sides. The framework being discussed was a first-look deal, meaning, in plain terms, Netflix gets eyes on every A24 project before anyone else, with the right of first refusal. The number circulating internally was north of $300 million over 5 years. For context, that was more than A24's entire combined production and acquisition budget for the 3 years prior. This was not rumor. Deadline and Variety both ran items noting that Netflix and A24 were in serious discussions. The trades treated it as practically done. In early 2018, A24's co-founders Daniel Katz, David Fenkel, and John Hodges held multiple face-to-face sessions at Netflix's Los Angeles offices on Sunset. The deal had internal code names. It had a draft term sheet. There was a projected announcement window, late spring 2018. And then, without a single press release or official explanation, the whole thing went dark. No deal, no statement, just silence. 8 months later, A24 announced a multi-year production deal with Apple TV+, a different streamer entirely, on completely different terms. Here is where the official version of events starts to collapse. The public narrative, to whatever extent one existed, was that A24 and Netflix simply couldn't align on terms. Creative differences. The usual euphemism. But people inside both companies describe something more specific, more deliberate, and far more revealing about how Netflix actually operates. The sticking point was not the money. Netflix's $300 million was real, and A24 knew it was real. The sticking point was a single clause buried in the contract language that determined who owned the films afterward. Remember that. We're coming back to it. Netflix's standard content deal, the one they've deployed with nearly every independent studio and filmmaker they've brought inside, requires full ownership of the content. Not a licensing window, not a revenue share arrangement. Full, permanent rights. When you stream an A24 film on Netflix today, you should know Netflix licensed it. They do not own it. That distinction is everything for a company like A24, whose entire financial model and long-term valuation is built on controlling their own library. What A24's team saw in that 2018 term sheet was not a partnership. It was an acquisition dressed as a collaboration. The clause was structured so that after 5 years, Netflix would hold perpetual rights to every film produced under the agreement. Every Ari Aster project. Every A24 original. Gone from A24's library. Permanently. But here is the part they really buried. Internal Netflix analytics from that same period, data that surfaced later in broader reporting on how Netflix's recommendation algorithm actually allocates attention, showed that A24-style prestige films, despite generating enormous critical coverage, significantly underperformed on completion rates and rewatch numbers compared to genre releases and mainstream content. Netflix's internal data team had already flagged to the content acquisition group that the deal's return projections were soft. The $300 million figure was partly a negotiating anchor, not a firm commitment. Netflix let the deal die slowly. They kept A24 at the table just long enough that A24 couldn't negotiate aggressively elsewhere. Then they stepped back without explanation. The deal didn't fall apart. It was allowed to expire. If that agreement had closed, A24's library, Hereditary, Midsommar, The Lighthouse, everything Ari Aster and Robert Eggers built after 2018, would sit inside Netflix's content vault today. Not A24's. The company's 2022 fundraising round, which valued A24 at $2.5 billion, was built almost entirely on the value of owning that catalog. The Netflix deal would have made them richer in the short term and hollowed them out in the long term. Independent film's last great success story would be a streaming subsidiary right now. The Apple deal that actually happened preserved A24's independence, but it also defined the ceiling of what Apple TV Plus ever became, a prestige credibility vehicle, not a genuine cultural force. What nobody has answered is whether Netflix knew exactly what they were doing. Whether the slow walk was deliberate strategy, run out the clock, deliver A24 to a competitor, let Apple absorb the risk on an expensive library bet and wait. Because Netflix has done this before, with another studio, and that one didn't end as cleanly for anyone involved.